Welcome back, beautiful people. My name is, of course, Michael Granado. I'm a history and philosophy educator, and in this video, I'm going to be reviewing a conversation that happens between Richard Dawkins and Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I've watched this video recently on my way to work. The video is titled "The God Debate." Now, I'm putting that in air quotes because it's not really a debate. I'm not sure why they titled it a debate. Now, I say that for technical reasons, not just to criticize Dawkins or Ayaan here. Typically speaking, in a debate, it's two different people who are putting forth arguments for their position. That's not really what we get here from either side. From Ayaan, we just get a record of an account of why she converted to Christianity from her personal experience. And from Dawkins, we just kind of get general insults towards Christianity and by extension towards Ayaan for holding Christian beliefs, neither of which are actual arguments. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm guessing that most of you do since you clicked to watch this video, or maybe you have seen the video. Both Richard Dawkins and Ayaan are associated with the New Atheist movement. The New Atheist movement, broadly, generally speaking, was a trend in the early 2000s to the mid 2000s. I say trend, was a intellectual movement that involved several people. We had some pretty famous, popular debates between several of these figures and other Christian figures that kind of brought atheism to the forefront of the American cultural conversation. I don't want to say forefront. Maybe this wasn't as popular as I thought it was. I was very aware of what was happening, so it was popular in my world. But the New Atheist movement is kind of defined by several different figures. Most notably, you have the four horsemen, I think they were, the four horsemen. Richard Dawkins, who was in this video, Sam Harris, the late Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens. And they would kind of have these public debates with Christian theologians, philosophers, and generally be a part of like the news cycle and stuff like, and give their hot takes on whatever political event was happening. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali was loosely associated with them, or generally, she wasn't in the main circle, but she was associated with them and came to popularity most notably because of her background. Of course, used to be Muslim, and she deconverted to atheism, and more recently has entered back into the news cycle because she converted to Christianity. And that's kind of where this conversation came from, because Ayaan released this public letter about her conversion to Christianity. Dawkins responded, and then they agreed to meet up to kind of have this conversation with each other. Since they're not presenting like actual arguments for either of their position, what I'm going to focus on for this video and what kind of caught my attention in this conversation is this distinction that emerges between cultural or political Christianity on the one hand and actual, for lack of a better word, actual Christianity on the other, and what exactly this cultural political Christianity means, because both actually, even though it's being framed as this debate between Dawkins and Ayaan, they're very close together intellectually, politically, culturally speaking, and there's really not a lot of disagreement between the two, aside from maybe their different metaphysical positions about the existence or non-existence of God. Other than that, they're kind of in agreement with each other. And that's kind of what I want to focus on here, is that cultural, political Christianity. But let's go ahead and get started with the video, and then I'll kind of explain a little more about what exactly I mean by cultural, political Christianity. So here we go.
And I'm staggering to say, I'm just trying to say, no, it's not stupid. It's
Okay.
in fact, it's clever and it's wise.
So you believe in some kind of higher power, which is comforting you, and you're obviously reacting from an Islamic past, and I know that from what you've written, that part of what you feel is Christianity is a bulwark against Islam, which is a quite separate thing from what you've been now saying, but you stand by that. I mean, you that's part of what you're saying, and I accept that, and I support that. That's why I've called you a political Christian. But from what you've just said, it sounds as though you're more than just a political Christian. I mean, it sounds as though you actually believe it.
Yeah, so to kind of start off with, Dawkins is expressing confusion because at first glance, and we'll kind of read Ayaan's letter that she released, Ayaan seems to be more focused on Christianity as a cultural institution, specifically Christianity over and against other religious influences. Of course, what we're talking about here is Islam. There's no other religions that are named. The focus here is on Islam, Islamic immigrants, and the threat of Islamic culture, which we'll get back to here in a second. But Dawkins is expressing a little bit of confusion because at first glance, in the first part of this conversion story that Ayaan shared, the focus seemed to be more cultural / political. But here in this conversation, she's talking about her actual belief in Jesus and the reasons for her conversion, which, again, we'll talk about in a second, but that's kind of what she was criticized for with the initial announcement. So Dawkins is kind of asking for this clarification. Well, are you a political / cultural Christian, or are you an actual Christian? Well, let's talk about that distinction for a moment, because this is what this entire conversation is kind of built around. So I'm using the term actual Christian here. So basically what this boils down to is, think of the question, what does it mean for somebody to be a Christian? Or if you are a Christian, imagine you're talking to somebody who's a Christian, or if you are a Christian, if somebody were to ask you that question, what does it mean to be a Christian? How would they respond? Now, generally speaking, the answer that they're going to give is going to revolve around particular beliefs they have about God, Jesus, the afterlife, maybe. It's going to be some sort of statement or proclamation of faith that they have. One popular example of this is the Apostles' Creed. This is kind of gives a general overview of what Christian belief is and what you have to accept in order to believe a Christian. I believe in God. In order to be a Christian, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, who was crucified, died, buried, and was raised again from the dead. Now, that is the Apostles' Creed is accepted by a lot of different Protestant denominations. It's, of course, accepted, generally speaking, by the Catholic Church. There are some denominations, Christian denominations, that would vary from that. But generally, broadly speaking, this is this sort of answer that you're going to get when you ask somebody that question. And now, if there are any Christians who watch this video, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But generally speaking, what you're going to get when you ask somebody, what does it mean to be a Christian? You're going to get some sort of belief in a theistic God, a God that cares about, is concerned about the fate and the development of human beings and of individuals, specifically speaking, belief in a theistic God, some sort of statement about the nature and the person of Jesus Christ, generally that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that there are some different interpretations on what exactly that means. This is not the video to parse that out, but Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus Christ physically died, was resurrected from the dead, and then some sort of beliefs about the nature and structure of the afterlife are very common responses. And this is separate and distinct from what Dawkins and Ayaan mean by cultural or political Christians. And within this separation, what does it mean to be a cultural or political Christian? Even here, we have to distinguish between the very broad meaning of the term and then the specific meaning of the term as it's being used in this conversation. So broadly speaking, is somebody a cultural Christian, or what does it mean for somebody to be a cultural Christian? Broadly speaking, we could just say that what it means to be a cultural Christian is to be born and raised in a country and a nation in which most of the population are Christian, most of the values, ethics, morals, education that is given to somebody is loosely Christian. If you grew up in most parts of Europe, in the United States, most, and if not all of North and South America, parts of Africa, Australia, these countries are broadly speaking Christian. And what I mean by that is a majority of the population are Christian. And what that usually means is that aspects of Christianity seep into the culture. For example, I grew up in the American South in the state of Georgia, and how I explain this to my students when I talk about cultural Christianity, geographically speaking, I like to bring up Google Maps around my house, and just within like a mile radius, I get them to count how many Christian churches there are. So we're talking about the physical presence of Christianity in the forms of places of worship, visual images that are found in and around the community, and of course that seeps into other areas of life. Growing up, even if you weren't like a super committed fan of Jesus, you still went to church every Sunday, because church in the American South was just part of the cultural ethos. It was a place of congregation. It's a place where people met up. We had communal dinners, families got together, they had events for children in the community. It was what the local community was centered around, and there was a lot of communal outreach. And this is another thing I get students, especially if I have students that are atheist or agnostic, or who say that they've never really practiced a religious tradition. If they grew up in the United States and if they grew up in the American South, I'll ask them questions about Christianity, and they'll just kind of know the answer to it, not because they've been taught it, but just because they've absorbed it from their surrounding culture. That's, on one level, in a very broad sense, what it means to be a cultural Christian, to grow up and to exist in a society that is overwhelmingly Christian, both in outward appearance and in terms of the ideas and values that are placed and passed on to the individual. So that's the broad meaning of what it means to be a cultural Christian. And I'm using cultural, political, Christian kind of interchangeably here because it's not really a set definition. But there's also a more specific use that we're talking about. And this is more overtly political. And this is actually expressed explicitly by Ayaan in her letter outlining her conversion, which I want to share now. And this will probably give you a better sense of what I'm talking about. Let me make this full screen here. So this is from Ayaan's letter that she wrote, the title of which, Why I Am Now a Christian. And look at that subtitle, Atheism Can't Equip Us for a Civilizational War. So why is she a Christian out the gate? The reason for this why is not some deep spiritual conversion, at least on a surface level. No offense, Ayaan, maybe you have had that. She makes it clear, these are her own words, that what we're talking about here is more politically oriented. So for the first part of the article, she's talking about her background as a Muslim and the history of where she came from. What I want to focus on here are these two paragraphs. So Ayaan, of course, was an atheist. So she asked the question, so what changed? Why do I call myself a Christian now? Part of the answer is global. Western civilization is under threat from three different but related forces. Listen to this. The resurgence of great power authoritarianism and expansionism in the forms of Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin's Russia, the rise of global Islamism, which threatens to mobilize a vast population against the West, and the viral spread of woke ideology, which is eating into the moral fiber of the next generation. So think about that for a second. And maybe this is just odd to me, again, growing up in the American South, but as a teenager, if I were to ask somebody, why are you a Christian? And I come from a form of Christianity that is very evangelical in nature, that really emphasize like these grand spiritual experiences and conversions. But if I were to ask somebody when I was a teenager, well, what makes you a Christian? They would probably talk about how Jesus saved them from drug addiction, or how Jesus saved their marriage, or how they were at their wits' end and the depths of despair, and they cried out to God, and God answered them and healed them. Ayaan asked this question, why did she convert? And her answer is the rise of communism, or authoritarianism in the form of the Chinese communists, and the spread of Islam. Christians, feel free to respond here, but that just seems kind of odd to me. I don't know. maybe I'm missing something, but this is what we mean by cultural or political Christianity. The impetus behind the Christianity has very little to do with those beliefs that I talked about and has more to do with politics surrounding the country into which we're born. It's a form of like Christian nationalism, I guess. But even most Christian nationalists believe aspects, metaphysical aspects, or theological claims of Christianity. And these are the precise sentiments that Ayaan's going to express in this conversation with Dawkins. So I'll let her talk here and explain her position more.
To those specific questions of Richard, when the vicar is saying that Jesus is the Son of God literally, not figuratively,
Yeah.
how do you square that with your highly trained rational mind?
Well, it is, again, different planes of perception. So I choose to accept Jesus Christ, the teachings of Jesus Christ, the story of Jesus Christ. I choose to accept that. So on the personal level, the rewards I get, very subjective again, but mine and through choice, which is separate from where I think that, aside from my personal experience, the history of Western civilization is mainly Christian, and that the external forces, for instance, the spread of Islam non-violently or violently, and the challenge of Islam and the message of Islam to Western civilization can be countered and should be countered with the message of Western civilization, which is essentially Christian. And in that sense, I think there are more people who agree with me, but that is on the societal level. And then on the civilizational level, I think that every moral, you've used yourself, Richard, the phrase lately that there is moral Christianity and there is cultural Christianity. And when moral and cultural Christianity collides with moral and cultural Islam, or moral and cultural Confucianism, or cultural authoritarianism, I think then perhaps we're on the same page about that might be a way of countering it.
Yes.
But on the personal level, yes, I choose to believe in God. And I think there we might say, let's agree to disagree.
So the interviewer asked her these questions that Dawkins brought up. Well, do you actually believe these metaphysical / theological positions that Christianity is accepting? And Ayaan starts off by saying, yes, I accept them on a personal level, but then quickly pivots to talk about the threat of Islam, that Islam is a fundamental threat to Western civilization. And as Ayaan pointed out, Dawkins actually kind of agrees with her on this. And she references Dawkins claiming to be a cultural Christian. There was a recent interview that Dawkins did for some British news network. I'm going to play a clip of the LBC, in which Dawkins was invited on for their Easter program. And anyway, let me just, instead of putting words in Dawkins' mouth, this is how Dawkins responds.
Welcome to LBC.
Thank you.
And what would be your Easter message? I mean, I've said a few things. What would you tell the nation?
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically, the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my...
Okay, so when asked, what is your Easter message? Dawkins' response is that he's concerned about how Ramadan's being promoted. And the concern here stems from the fact that he's worried that Christianity as a religion, which he does not agree with, he's worried that that's going to be replaced with something else. Specifically, what he's worried about is that it's going to be replaced with Islam. So what I find particularly odd and confusing about this entire conversations that Dawkins had with Ayaan is there's a lot of irony in the position that Dawkins takes at the beginning of this conversation and the positions that he himself has purported, because he criticizes Ayaan, makes fun of the beliefs of the vicar, the beliefs of the church, and implies that Ayaan has no reason to actually believe these things, that they're silly, that they're rooted in fear, that they're rooted in just vague, they're rooted in things other than rational belief, that these beliefs are unjustified and that they're stemming from some sort of emotional response. That's his kind of general pushback. So my principal question here would be for people like Dawkins and for Ayaan, but especially for Dawkins, since he's the one that's criticizing this sort of belief, what is your belief in the fear of Islam founded in? Why exactly are you worried that Islam is going to replace Christianity? And why does this make you a defender of cultural Christianity? Because let's look for a second about the statistics. Are there legitimate reasons for this fear? Does Dawkins have good reason to be afraid that Christianity is somehow going to be upended? And statistically speaking, this is coming from the 2001 census. Dawkins is, of course, from the UK, the census of England and Wales. And the blue bars are from 2001. The gray is from 2011, I believe. But 46% of England and Wales still consider themselves to be Christian, which is still a majority. The largest group that has significantly grown in the past 10 years in England and Wales. Muslim population growth, yes, it went from, as you can see, 4.9 to 6.5%, a 2% increase, roughly speaking. But the biggest group that grew was actually non-believers, no religious affiliation, which went from 25% to 37%. Roughly speaking. It's just kind of odd of where this perceived threat is coming from. This belief that Dawkins has seems to not be rooted in any sort of statistical data or any actual data, empirical data that we have, but seems instead to be coming from an emotional response, the exact same sort of emotional response that he's criticizing Ayaan for. So I don't know if he realizes that, but he's doing the very thing that he's criticizing somebody else for. So yeah, that's kind of just what stood out to me there. That's kind of mostly what I wanted to point out. There is this sort of shift, and we see it not just with Dawkins, but we see it with other very prominent intellectual influences, people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, of course, Sam Harris as well will make similar claims. But the rise of cultural political Christianity. Okay, that's mostly what I wanted to talk about, so I'll kind of end the video there. Let me know what you think, specifically if you're a Christian. I would like to get your input about this. Do you kind of how you view and you interpret responses about cultural political Christianity? I'm interested in that. If you're not Christian, if you're atheist, if you belong to the new atheist community, what do you think about Dawkins' statement and Ayaan's conversion? What's going on here? What's happening here? Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you all later.